Welcome to this afternoon's forum, Open Research and Learning, Collaboration, Connections, and Communities. My name is John Butler, and I'm one of the Associate University Librarians. And it's my pleasure to introduce this afternoon's event, which is sponsored on behalf of the University Libraries and the Department of Anthropology. So thanks to both of those organizations for making this possible. It's usually Karen Williams who would give these welcoming remarks, but Karen has been summoned away to speak with the Senate Research Committee on other scholarly communications publishing open access issues. So she is officially and legitimately excused. The hallmark of these events, as they have occurred over the past few years, is not only the luminaries of speakers and panelists that are assembled, and this year is clearly no different, but also the great discussions that ensue. One thing that I think is clear is that this event may be a bit rare in that it attracts such a wonderfully diverse range of audience participants: faculty, librarians, graduate students, people who are interested as enthusiasts or advocates in the policy developments in this space. And that's just critically important that we have this integrative mix at this event. So I wish us all a very stimulating afternoon of discussion, presentations, as we continue to explore the issues and the possibilities in the open research and learning space. It is truly ours to advance. With that, I'd like to introduce this afternoon's panel moderator, Nancy Sims, who will have a few remarks of her own and proceed with introducing our speakers. Nancy, whom I'm sure that most of you probably already know, given her visibility and presence on campus, is our copyright program librarian. And she's been a wonderful addition to our staff over the past few years, working with faculty, with administrators, with students in terms of copyright and rights education and consultation. So Nancy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, John, and thank all of you for coming. I am here to basically welcome you again, which John already did. I wanted to take a moment to thank the folks on the library staff who really collaborated to put together this event. I am one of several members of the Scholarly Communications Collaborative who've taken the logistical lead on this event, and Nancy Herther is our subject specialist librarian in anthropology, who was the person who connected us with Professor Jackson. He was already visiting campus and before we put this event together. And especially to thank Catherine Chu, who's the head of the Scholarly Communications Collaborative and has really been the lead coordinator for today's event. So a big thanks to all of them and to all of you for coming. Just very briefly, the reason we put together a really different panel than we have in the past. You may have seen the libraries talking about open access publishing. That's been something we're really focused on, and we're interested in the developments in how scholarly literature of fairly traditional types gets disseminated. But that's not the only place that scholarship is evolving and changing. And we're really excited by all the different projects here at the University of Minnesota and at lots of other universities. So that's kind of the theme that brought us together today, the idea of open scholarship and open collaborative projects across a lot of different disciplines. So our speakers today, one will be joining us shortly because she's still teaching, but our first speaker is Dr. Jason Baird Jackson, who's a folklore professor from Indiana University, and he's also involved in the Open Folklore Project, and so he will be our first speaker. He will be followed by Doug Armato, who's the director of the University of Minnesota Press, and then followed by David Ernst, who's the director of Academic and Information Technology for the Center for Education and, CEHD, College of Education and Human Development. And our final panelist will be Dr. Lucy Fortson, who, as I mentioned, is coming from her class, and she is an associate professor of physics and astronomy here at the University of Minnesota. So thank you very much, and welcome to today's event.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I'm very excited about this event. It's been a chance to connect with people that I've been eager to reconnect with and to meet folks who I've been eager to meet and haven't had a chance until today. I want to particularly thank the students, the undergraduate students in the Department of Anthropology who invited me to campus this time. They had a wonderful student conference this past weekend at the Arboretum, and I got to participate along with them, and they were quite an impressive group with wonderful senior theses. It was, as a university teacher, it was quite inspiring, and I'm thankful for the invitation that they extended to me, in part because their conference was wonderful, but also because it provided me with this extra benefit of reconnecting with the library. So I want to thank all of the organizers and thank all of you for coming today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the other panelists and the discussion, which we'll have later in the afternoon. So my topic has been labeled Open Access 2.0, but I'm going to be trying to speak to at least some of the afternoon's themes, and my focus will be on collaboration. The matters that I'll be speaking about are very much in the news right now. If you're in the higher education world, which I think all of you are, you may occasionally consult the Chronicle of Higher Education or Inside Higher Education. If we just look today in my email box and maybe in some of your email boxes, we could note, for instance, that the Chronicle had at least 2 stories of direct relevance to us. There's one on the virtues of blogging as a scholarly activity, a second story on social networks for academics, and then Inside Higher Education reported on the Modern Language Association's engagements with tenure and promotion guidelines in an article called Getting Digital Respect. So this is very timely, the things we're going to be trying to talk with one another about. Developments are happening so quickly, though, it's hard to keep up, and I can't claim any special expertise in the keeping up department, but I'm going to try to reflect a little bit based on my own experiences working on these issues. A few years ago, I had an amazing opportunity to speak here at another library-sponsored event. That gathering was called Scholarly Publishing and Scholarly Values, Choosing Our Future. In my talk, I drew upon my experience as a journal editor during a stressful era to offer what was probably an overly long and overly detailed account of the changing scholarly publishing landscape, with a focus on how open access strategies are changing the ways that we're circulating our scholarly work. I learned much from the audience and my fellow panelists on that occasion, and I'm equally hopeful about today's gathering. My remarks 2 years ago on what was and often still is called publishing, although I find myself more and more falling with the newer and more inclusive label of scholarly communications. The publishing part will not be foregrounded in my briefer remarks today. Instead, the charge that I've been given by the organizers is to reflect upon what, for today's event, has been called a bit tongue-in-cheek, I think, Open Access 2.0. The reference here is not to my being given a second chance at a Minnesota audience, although I'm really grateful for that aspect. The reference is to the nickname Web 2.0. Born about, as its reference has become normalized, we've heard this label less and less in recent years. Born about 1999 and in popular usage after 2003, the name captured the idea of a more participatory internet. Its key features were and are technical interoperability, user-centered design, increasingly complex information sharing, and distributed collaboration. Widely discussed features of this newer form of internet are the shift from consumption to production, the rise of social media, a move from organization by hierarchical typology to folksonomy, the importance of algorithmic-based search, and cultural creativity centered on remix and mashup. I'm no expert, and we can ponder the actual details in all of this. I'm just unpacking the illusion. In Web 1.0, we engaged with websites. In Web 2.0, we participate in making the web, even in such small tasks as clicking on a link. My fellow anthropology colleague, Michael Wesch, helped many of us understand the move to a database-backed web and its implications in his landmark viral video, The Web is Using Us, or The Web is Us. All the themes evoked by the Web 2.0 nickname play out in particular and relevant ways in the work of teaching and research, and in the ways these activities are supported by research libraries. So what does Open Access 2.0 mean? The label is already under discussion by others, but I'm not here to advocate for its use or to make any special claims on its behalf as a label. For me, and perhaps for us as a community gathered here at this particular time and place on the Minnesota campus, the label is a simple evocation. It's the tag attached to the first question on our agenda. What social, quote, what social dynamics or institutional cultural shifts lead to successful open research partnerships? And this is the part, unquote, this is the part that I'm going to try to reflect upon. When I visited here in 2010, I was talking about open access journals, but as a learner, I was asking the amazing librarians here about their own important contributions in this realm. I was eager to learn about the Scholarly Communications Collaborative centered in the library, and I was very interested in projects with major nodes on this campus, such as the HathiTrust Digital Library, and most centrally for my interest then and now, the Ethics Share project. I was asking about Ethics Share because I was part of a team working behind the scenes to launch a comparable project that is now out in the open and is known as Open Folklore. While I'll try not to dwell overly on Open Folklore, the project can ground today's topic. Like other open access projects, Open Folklore produces new social relationships and partnerships as a byproduct of the effort's immediate goals. Given the gift economy central to non-commercial open access projects and the Web 2.0 architectures in which such projects unfold, the community building work of such efforts should not be particularly surprising. Surprising or not, they're certainly fruitful and a lot more fun than the work that many of us experience in our dealings with mega publishers such as Elsevier, Springer, or Routledge. Here's a glimpse of Open Folklore for purposes of my argument. Open Folklore, or OF, is one expression of the open access movement in the field of folklore studies. While still struggling to answer a range of challenging questions, those supporting OF believe in the ethical, intellectual, political, and economic imperatives of open access to the scholarly literature and are committed to working collaboratively to develop open access strategies appropriate for the specifics of the field of folklore studies and the diverse communities worldwide with which folklorists partner. If you're totally new to open access, I would like to point you to Peter Suber's brief overview, which is easily found online, and especially relevant for my campus and for yours is the open access statement that the CIC Provost published in Inside Higher Education in February. Organizationally, Open Folklore is a partnership of the American Folklore Society and the Indiana University Bloomington Libraries. It builds upon particular strengths and concerns in folklore studies, new opportunities and resources in the wider world, and some special circumstances at Indiana University and inside the American Folklore Society. OF is now a network that extends beyond these two lead partners. I'll revisit this aspect in a moment. One foundation for Open Folklore is the 57,000 title IU Folklore Collection. This valuable library collection was digitized as part of IU's involvement in the Google Books project and is also now incorporated into the HathiTrust Digital Library, a major non-commercial digital library central to Open Folklore and a signature project of the CIC universities, including Minnesota. Many other IU resources are woven into OF. Our library was eager to be involved with the project as a means of extending its collection's strengths in the field in the digital era. For the library, Open Folklore is in part a new manifestation of its collection's development work. It also expresses a hope that libraries and scholarly societies can resume their logical role as allies in the public interest rather than continuing to become increasingly sundered as societies partner with or emulate the business practices of the large commercial publishers. For the broader folklore community, including the communities with whom folklorists work, OF is an effort to make reliable scholarship more discoverable and freely available. Colleagues in many places are doing this work. Consulting the OF website provides an encouraging sense of the OA work, open access work, that many have already been pursuing. Through the portal as well as offline, the Open Folklore Project aims to facilitate and intensify this broader work. Trying to explain the project architecture, I usually describe OF as a network of buckets, buckets in this case of scholarly information. Many have established such buckets, and many more have contributed to filling them. As a portal, OF helps the world discover where the buckets are and what can be found within them. While the range of media within the purview of the project will grow, 4 broad modes of scholarly communication are presently at the center of the effort: books, journals in the classic mode, gray literature works of a diverse sort, and websites of scholarly interest and relevance. Much open access scholarship in folklore studies is available online, but is not yet being made available in ways that allow it to be easily incorporated into general purpose tools like Google Scholar, or to specific ones like Open Folklore's search tool. For such materials, the approach taken on the portal is what I've called curate, educate, and link. For materials that are technically interoperable, and that's a growing corpus. Because the repository or journal publishing software that are used to circulate them, Open Folklore can go one better, harvesting the records for such work and providing users with a unified search of these aggregated materials. The OF search tool allows anyone who can get online the ability to search a large and growing number of folklore journals while concurrently searching freely available books published by Utah State University Press and folklore materials deposited in institutional repositories such as the OSU Knowledge Bank, IU ScholarWorks Repository, and the Digital Conservancy here at Minnesota. The diversity of journals, websites, books, and collections continues to grow on a monthly basis as the project expands substantively and socially. When users find records of interest using Open Folklore Search, they can use them to gain direct access to the relevant work, as well as to assist them in finding additional materials of interest, refining the search tool, growing the corpus being searched, and helping improve the quality of the harvested metadata are all key goals for the project in its current period. I could discuss various aspects of the project, including the ways that Open Folklore articulates with the Hati Trust and other efforts, but the social aspects of the project are the crucial issue here. When the Open Folklore project team uses the Internet Archives Archive It service to create a preservation copy of a content-rich folklore website, or when we get set up to harvest Open Archives Initiative Protocol for Metadata Harvesting, that's a technical protocol, compliant journals or repository collections, we could just do these things without asking the content creators about it. We could do it this way, but we do not do it that way for a reason. Actually taking time and talking to those behind the making and filling of such open access buckets gives us the opportunity to bring them into the expanding network of open folklore collaboration. In open folklore nomenclature, such collaborators are known as Friends of Open Folklore, and they become crucial partners nationally and internationally in the work. Some of these friends are doing amazing work building new OA infrastructure for our field. Others are rights holders willing to work with us to liberate their back content, bringing it into the open access universe. As a human social network, Open Folklore is increasingly the link that ties such partners together. Just as the portal site is a technical means of aggregating scholarship for teaching and research. Changing scholarly communications needs and practices, as well as emerging technical protocols and digital tools, are crucial elements, but these are means to an end. Extending research and building a stronger and more linguistically, economically, culturally, and socially diverse community of interest around the study of folklore is the goal. While we are only now beginning an assessment phase, all the early indicators are promising. Money is an important part of this. I'll leave Open Folklore on this point. The project is built out of open source software, goodwill, in-kind contributions, and sweat equity. While it relies upon the work of everyone involved in it, it has not yet sought grant funding or other external support, and it is not a line in either the IU Library or the American Folklore Society annual budget. This is one more way in which it is an open-air bazaar rather than a cathedral sort of project. While money can certainly get things done, it is not the only means towards that end. As the current Elsevier boycott suggests, a growing number of scholars are entertaining the Web 2.0 motto, money ruins everything. And it is certainly the case that Open Folklore is an effective open social network in the human and not the Facebook sense, in part because it is not monetized and it exists outside of commercial contexts. Its commercial concerns are to push back against commercial concerns, a project that is open to everyone except those who are being pushed back. With my main case on the table, I now want to diversify with a couple of broadening examples. better established and more widespread than efforts like Open Folklore, but crucial to consideration of the social side of open access, are scholarly blogs, particularly of the group blog variety. Such hubs now exist in many fields. I'm learning about new examples almost weekly. Because it is active in one of my fields, and because it has been a center for open access discussions in anthropology, Savage Minds is an example that I know well. Other examples include Edge of the American West for history or Crooked Timber for economics. The instance that I'll use as an example is Africa is a country. Africa, by the way, is not a country. I learned about this project a couple weeks ago at a conference on digital cultural production in African contexts. Founded about 5 years ago by Sean Jacobs, Africa as a Country began and remains as a venue for the critique of media representations of African societies. Today, it is a hub with 23 regular contributors, journalists, scholars, intellectuals. Begun in despair with media representations of Africa, the site is increasingly turned to by the media as a resource on African public affairs. I'm not a specialist in such matters. For me, Sean Jacobs, the founder's recent account of its behind-the-scenes workings, was another valuable illustration of the social nature of contemporary scholarly communications efforts. While most items published on Africa is a Country are formally linked to a named author, most are actually collaboratively authored, discussed, and edited before being published online. This does not happen via email or even in Google Documents, but is instead done right inside WordPress, the powerful blogging platform so central to such efforts. Put simply, the writings, films, images, etc., that we non-insiders see at sites like these become part of a larger community discourse. The broader community is most visible in conversations that happen in comment sections, for instance. But it is more broadly evident in citation practices and other measures of scholarly and public engagement. For those involved in producing them, there's an additional social aspect that's partially hidden. Such projects, as with fully functioning editorial review boards associated with classic journals, are also a kind of research collaboratory. Today, publishing software such as WordPress or open journal systems provide the infrastructure for such collaborative scholarly co-productions. So where does a group blog end and a journal begin? Knowing what software platform is being used will no longer help you figure it out. There are countless journals now running on basic WordPress instances. I'm the faculty advisor for a student journal of this type called Folklore Forum, now in its 44th year of publication and in its 4th year as a gold open access journal. With the creation of supporting software such as a Notum that give WordPress expanded functionality for journal publishing, the number and sophistication of WordPress-based journals will continue to grow. And this is an example that recently launched PLOS Currents, which runs on WordPress, this blogging software, but it has DOI numbers and all the usual stuff that we expect of a full-blown journal. I mention this here primarily as part of the open access story, but although not primarily as part of the open access story, although that is relevant, but because it again relates to social practices of scholarly collaboration. The barriers to creating a sophisticated group blog, if that's what you want, or a full-blown scholarly journal have never been lower. More and more scholars are assembling communities in and around these technologies and pursuing therein research and other intellectual work. Perhaps the most ambitious current project, at least in our corner of the world, in this space where social media and journals meet is an effort called Press Forward, being pursued on behalf of the larger community by the Center for History and New Media at George Mason University. I would like to describe it as an example of these trends and possibilities. While many open access journal projects have stuck close to the ancestral model and its hallmarks of fixed publication schedules, paginated issues, and a classic double-blind peer review, a very different kind of journal now walks amongst us. It is, among its many qualities, a dizzyingly social phenomenon. Press Forward's tagline is "Scholarship and Publication the Web Way." The project describes its goal as, quote, bringing together the best scholarship from around the web, producing vital open publications scholarly communities can gather around. See the relevance for my part of today. Press Forward is a strategy and a set of software tools that sits on top of WordPress. The first project using Press Forward is an initiative called Digital Humanities Now. Its nature will become clearer in a moment, but Digital Humanities Now feeds into a journal that was launched earlier this month called Journal of Digital Humanities. It's a comprehensive gold open access journal, but is built on top of a powerful social media ecology and a hybrid human algorithmic machine selection process. In some ways, Digital Humanities Now is the name given to this social and computational system. The process begins with the WordPress-based Digital Humanities Now. Digital Humanities Now filters for and from its scholarly community a wide range of RSS feeds and Twitter tweets, thereby aggregating and keeping tabs on what the English-speaking digital humanities community is sharing and discussing online. Intensive discussion shifts a chunk of unfiltered content, a substantive blog post most typically, into the top tweeted category. Such prominent points of community discussion may in turn become editor's choice items. That's where human intervention gets in the mix. On the basis of editorial review and selection, editor's choice pieces are partially republished in a consistent and attractive way on the Digital Humanities Now site. In this form, they are well-constructed teasers that will entice Digital Humanities Now readers to link out to the original online home of the content. This is not the end of the story, though. Such editor choice items then become eligible for peer review and more formal post-review revision and publication in the Journal of Digital Humanities. Importantly, the peer review is not the ancestral double-blind form, but is instead a sophisticated public and open peer review process. The inaugural issue of the Journal of Digital Humanities began with approximately 1,500 items, think submissions, a number that was, on the basis of community discourse and editorial selection, reduced to 85. And it was these 85 works that were subjected to an intensive peer review process that included hundreds and hundreds of collaborative communal inputs, in addition to the kinds of editorial interventions with which we're accustomed. Digital Humanities Now and the Journal of Digital Humanities are noteworthy in their particulars and their timeliness for our discussions, but they're just one node in a wholesale refiguring of scholarly activity. I mentioned the Journal of Digital Humanities in a recent talk on my own campus. The implications of an acceptance rate below 1% and hundreds rather than 2 or 3 or 4 peer reviewers was not lost on our Vice Provost for Faculty and Academic Affairs, who is presently leading an effort to revise our tenure and promotion guidelines. In light of our theme, the editors of the Journal of Digital Humanities called this new kind of journal, quote, a community source journal, a name that I particularly like. There's tons more that we can consider tackling in the open discussion, including the quandaries and problems that these new practices open up. As for additional topics, there are plenty, including the ways that scholars and scholarly societies are using social media platforms, particularly consumer ones, such as the Huffington Post or Al Jazeera or Twitter, the key role played by open source and thereby community-created software, the importance of Creative Commons licenses, the growing centrality of socially networked databases in scholarly life, and the nature of crowdsourcing as a resource strategy are all topics that fall into this realm. And then there's the teaching side, including the topic of open educational resources, and so much more. With a few examples on the table, though, I'll stop there. In response to the first question posed to the panel, I'll just say that scholarship has always been social, but that we've never had the kinds of opportunities that we now possess to diversify and extend scholarly communications, the scholarly communities in which we participate. In a world filled with lifelong learners, seeking knowledge, desperate social problems, needing redress, rapid cultural change, needing to be negotiated, and nearly boundless deprivation and suffering, we have an unprecedented need for scholarship that is widely and freely available, and for making sure that everyone with an interest in doing so has the capacity to benefit from and to contribute to our studies and conversations. So I'll leave it there with thanks.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. My name is Jay Hatch. I'm in the College of Education and Human Development. My question has to do with, I think you said there were several hundred, or was it 1,000 or something, of these potential papers that were presented to this digital journal.
Oh, mm-hmm.
And 1% of them eventually saw the light of day.
Is this on? Think of it this way, that they had seen the light of day at one level before anyone knew about them, because the content at issue was put out into the world primarily in the form of blog posts or other kinds of do-it-yourself content on the web by the original authors or groups of authors. So the material was already in some fashion put into the world, and the process that the Journal of Digital Humanities and the Digital Humanities Now efforts in partnership, and they're two projects designed to work together, was a filtering one in which about 1,500 items were winnowed down to 85, which received the most intensive peer review, and that would go on to be published in a more formal journal format, which was what the Journal of Digital Humanities was about. So think of it as a combination of different kinds of peer review, filtering 1,500 items down to 85.
Okay, and so my question is, what does that, in your opinion, what does that tell us about the materials, the 1,500 materials that were out there first?
Yeah.
Or are they something that we should not be paying attention to? Or what message are we sending by whittling them down to 1%? That's my question.
Obviously, those works, and obviously I only read a tiny fraction of them, and no one would have read all of them. They would surely serve various purposes of different kinds, and that the peer review is not neutral, and search routines and algorithms aren't neutral. I think that the bias that's being baked into this project, of which I'm not affiliated with the project, is one where they're trying to find and recognize contributions which resonate widely and that speak in impactful ways to a broad scholarly community, but that wouldn't discount the relevance of particular interventions or activities which would speak to a narrower slice, so that we can imagine in that initial 1,500 there would be a discussion of a particular painter or of a particular piece of software or of a historical event that would be relevant to scholarly discussions around those things, but that by its very nature that those items wouldn't have risen to the top in this context, which was searching for those writings which are out there in the world that were seen by the larger community of digital humanists as particularly relevant and worthy of a kind of collaborative improvement through peer review of a different sort. So the good news about this is that I'm speaking of someone else's project, but the folks behind this are super articulate in explaining what it is that they're trying to do and acknowledging the limitations of what they're not trying to do, so that if anyone's interested, there's an editorial that appears in the first issue of the Journal of Digital Humanities, which lays out the context and the strategies and the goals that are being evoked here. The reason I mention it beyond, I don't anticipate that many of you think of yourselves as digital humanists, but this is a project which is also building tools which it's hoped will be adaptable and usable in different ways by different kinds of communities. And this is what Press Forward is about, is that's another platform for publishing. And if the astrophysicists or the Russian studies scholars take up this, they can make adjustments to the mechanisms at issue such that it produces the kinds of results that those scholarly communities want, so that it's not a one-size-fits-all how this filtering and selection and peer review process would work. It's just another tool in our toolkit.
Lisa Johnston, Research Services Librarian here at the University of Minnesota. My question kind of flows nicely. I'm really interested more in that post-publication peer review process that you described. And I can certainly imagine some of the advantages to having more than 4 people look at a manuscript, but I can also see some disadvantages to have 100 comments on something.
Right.
So at what point do you have to consolidate some of that review, and who does that?
I can't speak for the Journal of Digital Humanities, but one of the hats that I wear is as a journal editor, and I should acknowledge that the journal that I edit is one of those ones that I was describing earlier that ported forward, despite being an open access journal, is many of the kind of conservative, time-tested practices that we've long known. Regular publication schedule, paginated, recognizable journal look and feel, all of those things. And I haven't done post-publication or experimental kinds of peer review in the journal that I edit. But I have an intuition about what those who are involved in those efforts would say about this. Kathleen Fitzpatrick would be a very prominent voice on these issues. She has a book recently published, which you can get online for free if you'd like, but it was published by NYU Press, I think, called Planned Obsolescence. My sense from talking to the post-publication peer review crowd, in a case like the Journal of Digital Humanities, I think that they would say is that, as in the past, ultimately it's the editor's role to interpret and make sense of that so as to help authors, in this case, produce the definitive final published version. And so that, as in the past, editors make sense of and translate an interpretation of the peer review results to the author with the acceptance decision. So that in this new environment, my reading of this is that the role of the editor is still, and in some ways even more important, because they have got a larger corpus of inputs that they need to help the author make sense of. And ultimately, one of the responsibilities of a journal editor, past or present or future, is to make decisions about what is in and what's out, but also what's going to receive the kind of certification of being the final version that has the result of these editorial interventions. So the Journal of Digital Humanities is publishing in something like a final form this content after that open peer review, and one key factor is going to be the editors and the editorial board shaping the content.
We may have time for more questions later, but I want to make sure all our speakers get full time as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't. So I'm happy to be here, and hope not to get myself in too much trouble, though I hope a little bit. One of the questions that Nancy suggested we might address on today's panel is what impact open access scholarship will have on the future of scholarly monographs. Much of the movement around open access has been around journal publication and issues relating to that, but books are quickly moving into this mix with several open access presses, and so we want to look at that environment as well. So I'll direct most of my comments to the issue of scholarly books, which of course is of great interest and import to a university press publisher. But I want to do so by suggesting that that term open access has 2 lives. One as a description of the increasingly vigorous environment for freely shared scholarship, which we've just seen some great examples of, but the other is as a political term and an economic cudgel. Open access as practice, as in the digital humanities, can coexist with and enrich the existing system of formal monograph and journal publication, and I believe even relieve some of the financial pressure that besets it. Open access's oppositional rhetoric as a struggle to the death promises instead a long stretch of turmoil, of creative destruction, with perhaps the potential for a utopian outcome. As Donald Waters, the program officer for scholarly communication at the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, observed in a talk at the University of Michigan Libraries in 2007, later reprinted in the Michigan Library-sponsored Open Access Journal of Electronic Publishing, the issues surrounding open access publishing may not be as straightforward as they appear to those partisans who are actively engaged in the debates. Waters later argues that open access needs to be balanced against the need for sustainability. It may be in the public interest to mandate open access, but it may may be equally a failure of public trust if such a mandate is not balanced by consideration of a requirement for sustainability so that the content and the publisher endures. I think Waters is using the term partisans advisedly here, and it should be noted that some open access advocates have attacked the Mellon Foundation for its insistence on sustainability, seeing that indeed as an impediment. And they've similarly challenged the Mellon-founded JSTOR, which seeks to spread the cost of digital publication and access across educational institutions of every size throughout the world, for JSTOR's lack of openness and the untweetability of its content. The phrase of the moment being, JSTOR is not your friend. As an inveterate tweeter, I've learned a tremendous amount from the free sharing that goes on in that private for-profit service. I take the critique of JSTOR not being fully open seriously, and I think it could move towards less restrictive sharing practices, especially as the launch of books at JSTOR, this will integrate book content into the journal content already available, is getting ready for launch in the fall of 2012. But I also think we need to recognize that these discussions of the public good of open access publication come amid an increasingly less accessible public higher education system, its own rapidly escalating tuition and consequently high student debt brought on by more than a decade of government disinvestment. The question is whether higher education will have the resources to continue to fund open access project and make those staffs available. I admit as part of this that it's hard for me at times not to see some open access rhetoric about the public good as a bit of a displacement of anxiety and guilt over the increasingly less open higher education system itself. The difference I outlined earlier between what I see between open access as practice and open access as a political rhetoric is to me the difference between a complex solution to a complex problem and a simple solution to a complex problem, between a system that evolves and one that moves towards revolution. But evolution is not always slow and gradual, nor is revolution always fast and effective. As we know, it's been proposed there are two basic theories of evolution, one involving gradual change, hardly visible, and one punctuated change occurring rapidly, often in response to a moment of systemic crisis and stress. Particularly now with the economic stress on higher education, university presses, and indeed the entire scholarly communication system, are clearly in one of those periods of rapid and critical change responding to stress. And though we don't seem to get very much public credit for it, university presses has adapted, as has been seen through such initiatives from Project Muse, founded at Johns Hopkins, and the National Academy Press's leadership in digital dissemination, through Duke Press's innovative partnership with Cornell University Libraries and its Project Euclid of open access journals, to the new ebook consortia that I've just spoken about being integrated into the Muse and JSTOR journals databases. This doesn't even mention partnerships of individual presses with their libraries and with such commercial partners as Google. The evolution is well underway and will accelerate as the environment for our books and journals and scholarly practice continues to transform around us. Revolution is another matter, as it appears rhetorically as the revolution in scholarly communication, or the open access movement, or Occupy Elsevier. One also hears much discussion of liberating scholarship from publishers, including nonprofit ones such as university presses. And indeed, my own press not long ago published a volume entitled Digitize This Book. Its title meant to resonate with the yippie activist Abby Hoffman's famous manifesto, Steal This Book, published in 1971, and ironically such a commercial success, making so much money for both author and publisher, that Hoffman joked in an interview with Rolling Stone that it's embarrassing when you try and overthrow the government and you wind up on the bestseller list. In the same way, that book, my book's author, Gary Hall, founded an excellent open access scholarly press, the Open Humanities Press, distributed by M Publishing at the University of Michigan Libraries, that is based on the ideas in his Minnesota book, though he very seldom mentions that book when talking about the project. If the terms revolution, movement, and liberation still seem too tame for the transformation underway, there's even the language of the saboteur. One university-hosted bibliography on digital scholarly communication has an entire subheading with 49 entries underneath entitled Derailing the Current Scholarly Publishing Model. Every time I see that heading, I tend to see crumpled train cars, spinning wheels, and mangled bodies. Words are important. I tend to believe that revolutionary rhetoric has done more to heighten tensions and impede transition in scholarly communication than to collaboratively and indeed peacefully advance it. For as we know, revolutions tend to open with an articulation of admirable, often utopian, even unassailable values, ideals that inspire the passions of followers, but without much consideration of the difficult, disruptive steps that will take us there, and even more importantly, the human, social, and cultural consequences of those steps and what is destroyed along the way. Also, as we know, often in history, revolutions have unintended consequences, as has been seen from France to Russia to Iran, and in a minor key, Newt Gingrich's proclaimed Republican Revolution of the 1980s, resulting in the end in regimes that little resemble the aspirations and principles voiced by those who founded the movement. Of course, there's another lesson from history of which I think we're all aware, that the ancient regime itself, those who stubbornly or belligerently side against change, generally itself does not come to a good end. As the pacifist novelist Haruki Murakami wrote of the allure of idealist rhetoric, reality is created out of confusion and contradiction, and if you exclude those elements, that is, if you reduce your rhetoric to the ideal, you're no longer talking about reality. By Murakami's measure, then, if you see our current publishing environment as one of confusion and contradiction, you're simply seeing it realistically. As the above may make clear, I hope, what I see ahead for the humanities and social sciences and for the monographs in those fields is an intensely innovative, hybridized environment for university scholarly communication, one that encompasses both open access and nonprofit models, works that are in university repositories and published in the established forms of books and journals, large digital humanities initiatives, and a lively constellation of individual and collaborative scholarly blogs, microblogs, and websites. In many cases, specific research projects will span all those forms in a process almost of osmosis, from less concentrated scholarly forms to more concentrated ones and back again. To some extent, this is already happening. My press's best-selling scholarly title this past year, also one of the most course-adopted, began as a series of blog posts and still exists in that form. And much of its scholarly communication, reception has occurred online. Versions of more specialized volumes that we publish already exist as unrevised dissertations in university repositories. The boundaries of the scholarly monograph literally are breaking down, and that's a good thing for both presses and authors. And while I don't speak for all university press publishers, it's increasingly clear that a policy towards copyright that allows scholarly authors to have greater control of their work, to limit the rights they convey to publishers, and more actively manage their own work will help foster this much richer and more diverse scholarly communications ecology. But as I've already said, this is a period of punctuated rather than gradual evolution, and I expect the scholarly monograph will itself transform rapidly, but only at the point that university promotion and tenure policies relieve presses of the responsibility, and it is a responsibility, of publishing the bulk of humanities and social science scholarship. In a chapter entitled Carpentry in his new book, Alien Phenomenology, just out from my press, the media studies scholar Ian Bogost outlines the difference between scholarly authors who write to have written rather than writing to be read. That is, he questions the need for the majority of scholars who do not have a vocation for writing books to nevertheless be compelled or to feel it necessary to write books. In Ian's formulation, those scholars might be better off building things, which Ian calls carpentry and others call digital humanities, or simply remaining, contributing to, collaborating in research and teaching. Bogo's book, I should mention, is nearly through its first printing in its first 3 months, despite having been in circulation by the author as a PDF for 2 years. To build on Ian's provocation, in this formulation, scholarly publications, including university presses, would work not with the majority of social science and humanities scholars, but those who have the vocation to be book authors. There would be fewer scholarly books, but they would link out, be networked within a rich environment of scholarship in university repositories, large digital humanities projects, including what Dan Cohen in his talk here last week dubbed mega meta collections, the wealth of what Mark Sample calls serial scholarship and blogs, and the vast new number of open access journals, which is one of the most exciting things in scholarly publishing now. And though I see the process as being more multi-directional, it also relates to what the MLA's Kathleen Fitzpatrick, whose work was cited earlier, has proposed as an environment in which the scholarly book emerges at the end rather than the beginning of a process of informal and collaborative scholarly output and open rather than blind review. One way in which my own press has tested this out, or is in the process of testing it out, is with our recent project debates in the digital humanities, which I presented on at length at the Institute for Advanced Study here at the University of Minnesota with my collaborator Matt Gold earlier this year. And I want to close just saying a couple things about that project, which we think of as a research and development project for a scholarly and economically hybrid project. And it's the economically hybrid which is, I think, most interesting. This project began really organized at one MLA, growing out of blog posts, Twitter feeds, panels, and everything else that discussed what the digital humanities was becoming and what it should become. We managed a very quick publication process of, after the project came together at one MLA, publishing it by the next one, and the book came out and is currently being transformed now into an open access website, which will not only include the content of the book, which would be a normal thing to do, but constantly solicit new editors, new essays rather, have a constantly updated table of contents, and allow authors to revise their works as new work comes available that comments and relates to it. And then we will continue the project disseminated through traditional means by turning it into the equivalent of an e-journal, which is issued through the more traditional forms of JSTOR and Project Muse. We don't know exactly what the result of all of this is going to be. But that is actually the point, that until you begin the process of getting out work which is hybrid economically as well as hybrid in terms of format, you don't really know what the result will be. So thank you, and I'll take questions.
So as you were speaking, hi Doug, I was looking at the University of Minnesota Press's webpage and of course trying to follow everything on Twitter as I do with a lot of these talks. And I realized that when I go to the home page and look for the digital humanities book, which I purchased because I want to write in it, that there are series with sort of disciplinary titles, but where would I find this book? What series would it be in, or what category is it? Because once it's off the front page, I could, obviously search for the title. But does the press have, are the press thinking of having a series that foregrounds this title or this category, this new emerging practice? Because obviously you're a platform for other people to build different kinds of publications.
I think that what's going to matter increasingly, especially as projects like Books at JSTOR and the Project Muse books comes online, isn't where something is on the home page, but where it is in what will become increasingly a database of scholarship. And it'll be really how Debates in the Digital Humanities links to other books, including not just ours, but those published by NYU Press, such as Kathleen Fitzpatrick's book, to websites, to other journal literature. That's sort of, I think, where it's going to happen. And the website will remain sort of a news resource for the books that we do in particular, but I really see an awful lot moving away from individual press publishing individual book to what this entire system of formal publication looks like together.
So a hashtag principle rather than a series principle, perhaps? Or
it's already a hashtag principle. Yeah. I mean, that's actually been one of the fun things about the book, is that it's had a hashtag from the beginning, and when it's taught in class, you see the class discussion playing out through the hashtag. You see different people commenting. It actually has a motion well beyond any kind of fixed website.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thanks. I think there might be one.
I'm curious about sustainability and this tension between open access and sustainability. And I think we have the same issue with open courseware and and sort of MITx and all of these developments. And so are there other models of sustainability that you think of? You talked about the hybrid,
I think that the primary model, and I'm not sure it's ready to be a model yet, is this idea of really moving formal scholarship out of the silos of individual books posted as PDFs and into a database where it's much more discoverable and interactive, where you can go freely from a reference in a journal article to a book and thus make it much more discoverable. Basically getting away from the idea that these are individual economic entities and making them instead one very large entity. For the purposes of, say, our model, let's just say that most of academic access to the books and journals that we publish ends up flowing through Project Muse and Books at JSTOR instead of through Amazon. What that would mean is a much simpler publication process, a much less economically intensive one that doesn't involve printing things and putting them in a warehouse, but also much wider usage, potentially, for the work that people actually need and want to find. It would break down disciplinary barriers because searches don't care what discipline you're talking about, necessarily. References that scholars use don't relate to that. So I think that we are seeing the potential for greater discoverability as helping that. It'll also change the payout so that a press like mine might be really thinking about 2 large checks a year from very large projects as opposed to just a constant flow of small bits of money. So I think it will change it. Whether it will be more sustainable or less sustainable is frankly very hard for me to say at this point.
Good afternoon. I'm David Ernst from the College of Education and Human Development, and I'm here to talk to you about a project at the University of Minnesota that's housed in the college. And it's there we go. It's a project, it's an open project. I'll describe it here in a minute, but I first want to describe what kind of problem it's trying to solve, and that is access to higher education. As was already mentioned, there we go. We all know the cost. I have 3 high school boys. I'm becoming alarmingly aware of the cost of higher education. And because for reasons, lots of reasons that I think we understand are relatively complex, but it's becoming a huge issue. You've seen our president just recently touring the country trying to talk about this. And a few stats here. Last year, or 2 years ago now, I guess, student financial aid total in the country outpaced credit card debt. Student financial aid debt, which is amazing to me. This year, in like a month and a half, the estimated student financial aid debt total will top $1 trillion. That's outstanding. Part of that cost, a small part, but a part, it's small here, I should say, but not small at places like in community colleges. It's actually almost on par with tuition many times, are the costs of textbooks. Textbook prices have increased at 4 times the rate of inflation the last several years. On average, at a 4-year public institution, students can be expected to pay almost $1,200 on course materials, mostly textbook costs there. And because of that, 7 in 10 students report that they don't buy a required textbook because of its costs, which is amazing to me. As part of this project, I talked to a student leader here on campus just about how she wanted to know how to be involved in this, how she could provide support to this project. And she, as we were sitting there, she said, you know, I've only bought one textbook the whole time I've been here. And this is a student leader on campus. And the consequences of that those high prices are simply, obviously, your students buy an education, right? I mean, it is something they are purchasing. So having a high cost obviously limits who can do that and creates a divide of people who can access it and who can't. But also, there is some growing evidence that the cost of materials in the classroom actually affects the retention rate, mainly because students choose not to buy the textbooks. Right or wrong, they just don't. And also we're finding, I think, with this emergence of electronic textbooks by publishers that because the cost of these textbooks is, because there is a price to it, and for good reason, it's a business, you need to obviously charge for that. Because of the price, materials are locked down pretty tight, and when there's an electronic textbooks that are the next, they're coming, and well, they're here. But they're the future of textbooks. But when they are proprietary, they are locked down, and that's one of the complaints that students have about them is simply that they're hard to interact with, they're hard to use because the publishers are so afraid of them being let go. So, you know, I'm not trying to say that that's right, or there are good things, there are bad things, there are pros and cons to publishers and open textbooks, but these are some of the consequences that are being cited. Our textbook had to do with open textbooks, and open textbooks can be defined a number of ways. A Creative Commons license is one way. Another way is what are called the 4 Rs. So the ability for a user to reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute. I think those terms are relatively self-explanatory. I do want to mention one of the questions that was sent to us in preparation for this was how does this affect authors' rights, these kind of open textbooks and this whole model? And I should say I almost didn't put that top graphic about the Creative Commons versus all, you know, the copyright, because it isn't really a versus. The Creative Commons is built on top of copyright. It takes advantage of copyright. When someone puts something in the Creative Commons is a license. When someone puts it in there, they still own the copyright. They're not giving up anything. What they're doing is having a very convenient conversation with end users, saying, you know what, you can use this in these ways. You don't have to email me every time you want to use it. Use it, go ahead, I don't care. Or I do care, and here's what I want. I want to make sure that you always give me attribution, or I always want to make sure you don't make any derivatives of it, or you don't use it to make money. It's not a corporate venture. So you can, it's an easy license. It's a license that allows you to easily control how people use it. But you're still the copyright owner, right? Open textbooks provide an opportunity for lowering the cost of these course materials. Open textbooks, because of their licensing, are much cheaper to being free. I'll get into that in a minute. But there are lots of barriers, many, many, many barriers. Our project attempted to deal with 2 of those barriers. Number one, where are these things? They're kind of scattered around the internet. Faculty at institutions might have created them. Maybe some organization created it. Maybe a state legislature funded the creation of some open materials. And they're kind of scattered around. The other issue is if you do happen to find them, how do you know if they're any good? As I've had discussions around the university this last several months, that second one is probably the top one I get asked all the time. Well, these things, how do we know that they're any good at all? Okay, so our project was to try to address that, to answer those 2 barriers, finding them, so discoverability, and looking at quality of these texts. There are hundreds of them out there, by the way, textbooks, open textbooks, just out there on the internet. We've created this catalog. If you have a computer out, you can go look at it right now, open.umn.edu. And it's a very, very simple catalog. One place to find these things, right? So what we do is point to where these things are across the internet. So we've addressed, hopefully, the how to find them, okay? They're right here. The second one with quality, I should say we have 90 in there right now, but we actually kicked off and announced this a week ago today. The timing for this is really good. It was, and last week I had many emails from people saying, I have an open textbook too, would you put it in the catalog? They're out there, like I said, hundreds of them. And people want them to be used. The authors want them to be used. That's why they put them out. So the project involves gathering reviews. So the question about, are these things any good? My answer to that is an unequivocal, I have no idea. I'm not qualified to judge that. Who is? Who are people who are qualified peers, faculty peers? So the next step in this, we've launched this thing. It has the 90 and growing textbooks in it right now, and our next step is to gather peer reviews of them. They may be all garbage. I don't know, and I'm not going to know until we find out. I don't think that's the case at all. But we will try to address and ask for that and find the answer of quality. The only measure we have right now of quality, which is all we have, is that to get into the, like I said, there are hundreds of them, but we only have 90 in there. These are 90 that have evidence of being adopted outside the author's institution. Okay, that's all we have. There's some evidence there at least that, oh, this is good enough for someone else, other than the author and whoever else they made at their institution use it. So that's what we have. That's what we're going to start with. So some of the people emailed me last week. I had to say, sorry, it doesn't meet the requirements. So work at getting adopted somewhere else and we'll talk. So this summer, we're starting to try to gather these. And it's not easy. It's work. If you've evaluated textbooks, which if you're faculty, most of you have, if not all of you, you know it isn't simple and it takes a lot of work. The dean in our college, Jean Quam, has agreed to support faculty who agree to review textbooks. I mean, our faculty who have expertise in those areas and agree to do it. But of course, she's not able to really pay people outside of our college. That's just a little too out there. So we are looking right now for funding to encourage faculty to adopt. We have other institutions who've contacted us and said, let's talk about this. They want to get involved. We have phone calls from foundations who are excited about this. Everyone's really trying to do what they know needs to be done, which is try everything they can, all these approaches to lower costs for students and improve access. One other thing that the next steps that we need to do is create a more sustainable catalog. What we've done so far is hand-discovered sources. And we need to find, there are some central repositories of these out there. One of them is Flat World Knowledge, which is an actual publishing company. Going back to that question of how does this affect authors' rights, and so on. And then the question that was asked about sustainability of initiatives like this. There are models that are growing of publishers who are selling open textbooks, which to some people seems a little contradictory, but open does not necessarily mean free. It just open means open. And so what these groups are doing, what these publishers are doing is if you go to Flat World Knowledge and find a book, what you'll see is that you can access the book for free online. You can buy a PDF or an EPUB which is a document format, EPUB version of it for $20, something like that. You can buy a print copy of it. I have one in my briefcase down here, a print copy of a textbook, and it's between $30, $35. And I haven't seen one that published more than $35. They tend to be about 20% of the cost of a proprietary licensed textbook. I've been taught not to call them commercially licensed textbooks. They're proprietary licensed textbooks, because these open textbooks are being sold commercially as well. So, so what we're going to try to do is partner with these publishers. Rice University just opened one called OpenStax. That has, they are actually working, I believe, with a private company to vet the quality of them up front. They have released, I think they're up to 5 or 6 textbooks. So what we're seeing is that some central kind of hubs for these, and what we're trying to do is build some ability for us to just kind of suck in some of the data that they create as they produce these textbooks, so this is a sustainable catalog that can be updated very easily. And also extending its usefulness. The textbook industry right now is just in chaos, to be honest. They really, they've kind of given up on print textbooks. If any of them have marketed to you recently, what are they marketing? Portals. Online portals, electronic textbooks, all those kinds of things. What they realize, I think, is their content is worth less and less, and what they're trying to do is layer services on top of that. And so there are lots of companies jumping up to try to take advantage of that. There are organizations that are trying to help students and faculty understand how much these things cost and the opportunities that they might have to lower costs. So there's one foundation that contacted me that's building a search tool that will allow for faculty to go on, look at a subject matter, a subject area, find all the textbooks available, including open textbooks, and so compare them side by side. They have access to publisher information. They have that, so they can pull that into their search tool, but they don't have any kind of central repository for open. So they're looking for data feeds from our catalog out as well to them. So we're going to be working on that. So I think that this is really an opportune time. We jumped in right now really to kind of express that the University of Minnesota can be a leader at this. We're not creating this movement of open. States are now funding it. Foundations are funding it. They see the same opportunity, and so there is a movement afoot. But what we are doing is trying to get out front, knock down some of these barriers, and see where it goes. And as with anything open, I'm finding this week after our lunch that there are benefits that you don't even think about. I'm finding this with open things. Once you open things up and you expect some certain thing, but oftentimes that certain thing will happen, but then a lot more. I got an email this week from a professor. He's a volunteer professor at the University of Zimbabwe. And he sent me an email just as a thank you to say, thank you for providing this. There's so much. You can see what he wrote here. There is so much potential worldwide. But what they need is access to materials like this. And that's it. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, I'm John Jeffries. I'm a librarian at Walter Library. And when I saw this announced in the brief last week, and then the same day, and I can't cite my source, I'm sorry, but there was a lawsuit that textbook publishers were taking up against open textbooks, claiming that they were largely using the same content and just like reorganizing it and putting it out there. Is there any, does that impact at all your project?
I believe what they were doing, and does anyone remember the organization that they sued? It was It was a nonprofit that, maybe it was a company, I actually don't know, but what they were doing was creating open textbooks, and they sued, if we're talking about the same thing, they sued them, even though all the content was original, they sued them because the structure of the textbooks they felt was too close to the proprietary textbooks. So the outline of the textbook looked too familiar, they said, to theirs. The content was original, but the structure, they said, was not. So what we're doing here is we're not creating any materials. All we're doing is pointing to things and trying to curate those pointers. So.
I guess were any of the titles that you guys had highlighted in your collection, and if they were titles that you were highlighting, did you then is there any worry that you need to remove?
No, none of these textbooks had anything to do with that. I should say, the textbook industry is, like I said, they're in chaos right now, and they will. I found out from, well, I won't say who I found out from. A day after it launched, the textbook industry lobbyists started pushing on our own legislators here in the state to shut us down because it was, as they said, it was unfair practices, something to that effect. They understand that things right now is a very vulnerable time for the textbook industry, and they're trying to figure things out really quick on what's next. In the meantime, everyone else is too, and they're kind of like the music industry did several years ago. They're using legal means to shut down whatever they possibly can. So. That's my own editorial comment, possibly.
Bob Rubini from Provost's
Hey,
office. Boundless Learning, I guess, is the group that was being sued by Pearson and all the major publishers for just what you said, David. I was interested in your thoughts on something that Cable Green said from Creative Commons at the Sloan conference that we were at. With regard to the notion of not necessarily excluding the commercial publishers, but a new model whereby there might be a number of universities or higher ed institutions that would put out like an RFP for a text to be produced, and then different publishers, profit or nonprofit, could bid on it, but it would go into Creative Commons when the RFP was fulfilled. So I was curious your observations on that sort of idea.
I have a lot to say about that, but let me just say that the textbook industry will not and should never go away. I know I sound rather maybe, I don't know, Marxist or something here, but the textbooks we have in here are core liberal ed undergraduate, the kind of courses everybody has at any institution, community college, higher education, high school. There's certainly, seems like a prime market for something like this because little changes, I mean, I know that I might get in trouble by saying that, but less changes there than in content than would be a lot of the niche areas that, you may all teach as faculty members in your expertise area, your cutting edge research, your whatever. But if you look through the textbooks in this catalog, they're very much kind of the basic liberal ed required courses. There's always going to be a place for textbooks that are, I mean, they take a lot of resources to make, and when they're open, the opportunity to get those resources back is probably not as high as a commercial textbook. So I think the industry always will have that niche market, not the market they probably prefer, but there's always a place there for them. How about if I leave it at that? I have other things I'd add to that, but. Hey, Jay.
Hi, Dave. Hi, Dave. Hello? Hello? Is it working? Oh,
there you
okay. So in the short term, I'm wondering whether or not if publishers have to move primarily to the niche markets, because my guess is that these books that are used by everybody keep the niche market cost much, much lower than it would be otherwise. So now instead of having a book about high-end fisheries work or something like that that costs $100 now, it'll be $300, $400.
Yeah, I can't tell you whether that's true or not, but I definitely those central courses are where the money is. Billions of dollars a year in those core textbooks. Yeah, I couldn't tell you whether they are.
This idea that you brought up, that someone else had, seems to me to be a possibility. I mean, that might be something that could work.
Yeah.
And if we, I noticed there's not a biology book.
There will be 2 of them in the fall.
On your list? Okay. I'll take a look at them. It costs a lot of money to put together really good ones that have good illustrations, that have good online, truly interactive, iterative learning kinds of models behind them. And I mean, I'm not going to do something like that, even if my heart says I should.
Right.
Because I just can't do it.
And you probably don't need to. I mean, if you're teaching the high-end, the fisheries course, yeah, you might be the person doing it. But if you're teaching a general ed, biology 101, there's going to be one out there. There will be in the fall, at least. I should say that money, it does take an immense amount of money to create these materials. But I think what's happening is that, and for years we've been talking about what's a sustainable model. And there are these publishers that are, it's working, like Flat World Knowledge. There is a model out there where they still are able to even pay the authors. They're able to get some resources from the sale of these. But right now, it's kind of a special time because there are also foundations and governments getting into the mix. So the state of Washington 2 years ago mandated that all the 81 core liberal ed community college courses in Washington, the whole state, the course materials can't cost more than $30. And then they funded the creation of those materials. They, I think, in the first year spent $1 million on material for creating the materials for half of those, for 40 of them. They saved students in 1 year $1.1 million. And of course, that will go on, right? The state of California right now is, I don't know if they've passed it or not, but they've been debating a $25 million bill to create open textbooks for their own courses for California for the same reason. This investment almost gets paid off in student savings almost immediately, and then it's carried forward because the books are there, and for year after year they will be available. Yeah, so, and foundations, by the way, the Saylor Foundation will pay authors $20,000. They emailed me, wanted me to advertise this, but anyway. They'll pay authors $20,000 to move their textbook into open, or to create a textbook if it fits their requirements and it fits into the content area that they need. So there are more and more kind of big organizations just funding it once, and then once you have an Algebra 1 textbook, you got an Algebra 1 textbook, and no one needs to start from scratch again.
I think we'll cut off questions there for now, so you can give a final speaker, Professor Fortson, and she's going to take a minute to switch out computers. So. Oh, great. Okay. He was using it. Leave the power cord if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. It doesn't work with yours.
It does. I'm giving 5-minute, 1-minute warning. Thanks. Yeah. There we go. Okay. So we've heard up to now a lot about the end piece of the process, publishing results from
data analysis, et cetera. And so I'm going to switch gears and talk a bit more about the beginning of the process and data reuse and open data. And in particular, I'm going to talk about a project that I've been involved in for the last 5 years that is managed by this group called the Citizen Science Alliance. And as is given by the title, the idea is that if you have a platform of open data, what can you do with all the crowdsourcing? What can you do with all the collective wisdom of the crowds with the data that is there? And so our story begins at the beginning of the universe. All stories begin at the beginning of the universe. So the story that got us to develop this citizen science project called Galaxy Zoo began with the question, what are galaxies and how do they relate to the evolution of the universe? And in the 100 some odd years ago, there was Edwin Hubble came up with a system to categorize. Of course, humans like to classify and categorize and put things in taxonomies and whatnot. So the same was done with the heavens, and the basic categories were spirals and ellipticals for galaxies. And there was an understanding eventually that emerged that spirals tended to be blue in color because there was a lot of star formation going on in them, and that ellipticals over here on the right, which are sort of blobby messes of stars, tended to be redder in color because their star formation was gone. They're called red and dead galaxies. Okay, so this, as I said, was put together by Edwin Hubble originally in a morphological classification diagram, and this was used over the last, some 100 years to classify galaxies, and these were done. This classification process was done by eye. So in Hubble's day, there may have been 10 to 100 galaxies, and so it's quite easy to do that classification process. Of course, astronomy has moved on, and we are now in the digital world where we're actually digitizing the sky, and we've moved from actual plates where you can register the galaxies on plates to film in the 1980s, where we had 10,000 galaxies. And even then, at one point, well, the professor might do it, but at least they gives it to the graduate student, and then the graduate student can classify the 10,000 galaxies by eye. But then in the 2000s, we have the Sloan Digital Sky Survey with 1 million galaxies. At that point, things become a little difficult, and we end up with graduate students deciding they're going to quit if they're asked to classify those morphologically by eye. Okay, so obviously this was known when the Sloan Digital Sky Survey was being built. At the time, a large part of the expense in building the Sloan Digital Sky Survey was developing the computer algorithms that would go into filtering the data as the data was coming in off the sky. And so we need computers to process that much data. But here comes the trick. So it turns out that in order to tell the difference between a simple spiral and a simple elliptical, computer algorithms are not smart enough to do that. So the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, the team putting it together, the algorithm, used a proxy. And the proxy was color. Color is a one-dimensional measurement that is actually quite easy to make. So they said, well, we all know over 100 years that spirals are blue and ellipticals are red. So we're just going to put that in our pipeline, our data pipeline, and that's going to be the answer. Okay, well, a couple people from the University of Oxford decided that wasn't good enough and decided that they had to go back and do by eye the morphological classification, because what are we missing about the story of galaxy evolution if indeed there are red ellipticals, or if indeed there are, red spirals, or indeed there are blue ellipticals? And so they searched for the best algorithm to use for this and found that in the end it was the human brain that has, over evolution, to tell the difference between the shadows in the forest versus the tiger stripes in the shadows of the forest. You were dead if you really didn't know how to tell the difference between those. So over time, of course, humans have evolved this unbelievable pattern matching algorithm inside the brain. And so once again, it went back to a graduate student and his postdoctoral advisor, who then said after the graduate student, 50,000 classifications in 1 week, went to the pub, this is in England, of course, and said, I'm not going to do that. I just can't do that anymore. And so at the time, NASA had put together a website that had 20,000 people around the world that were classifying small bits of trails of solar system dust that had been collected in samples. And so 20,000, that was pretty good. So they calculated out how long it would take for the public, if it was put up on the internet, in an interface such as this, to go through the entire million galaxies, and where each of the galaxies would be looked at a couple of times, just to make sure that it was done properly. So they figured it would take about 3 years, which at least the graduate student would be able to do other things in the meantime. Okay, so as it turns out, it was up for 1.5 years, 35 million classifications by 150,000 users. Okay, so wild success beyond our imagination. And this is just the first 6 months. The first day, the first 48 hours, there was over 1 million classifications. All right, so this equates to 3.3 continuous person years of data analysis. Meanwhile, the graduate student is working on papers, et cetera. Okay, now, was that worth something? Do all those clicks mean anything? In fact, we went beyond the first couple of topics that we had thought we would cover, which is, actually, are there any red spirals? Are there any blue ellipticals? Yes, there are, as it turns out. And all of the galaxy evolution work that went into that, in fact, there are more than 30 science papers that have come out of just the morphological classification of galaxies by eye. Okay, so from the success of that one project, we moved into the expanding Zooniverse, and we are now at a state, as of this morning, 637,267 volunteers around the world and counting, 12 projects ranging from astronomy, of course, our home project, to transcribing ancient Egyptian texts, now that's digital humanities, and decoding whale songs. Do whales have a language? Okay, we'll find out. There are many, many peer-reviewed publications that we have submitted beyond just that first Galaxy Zoo project. And we are in a stage where we've been funded by the Sloan Foundation and the National Science Foundation as an open call to the community to develop new projects, people that have more data than they know what to do with and need that human eye, that human processing power on their data. And the goal is to have 24 new projects in 2 years' time. And if you have an idea for a project, there's the link down there. Let us know. So moving on into that as a context to move into the discussion part of this panel, all of this provides us with the idea that there really is just a data deluge. And citizen scientists can come to the rescue for helping the academics understand their data. So as we have seen, data today is a data-intensive world. The data is coming from a variety of different sources. And e-science are the tools and technologies that support this federation and collaboration to understand where the data is leading and for knowledge extraction. And at the same time as that is true for the academic world, it is also providing the technological background for citizen science today. And so you know, today's citizen science is not what your grandma's citizen science was, okay? So I'm not dissing the bird counting stuff. That's great, and that's needed. But there are issues that go along with counting birds. For example, if you're sitting out in your Auntie May's backyard and you see a yellow-throated something or other come by, and you say, oh, I've seen that yellow-throated something or other, and you go to the webpage and you say that. How do you confirm that that really was true? Okay? So data collection is one form of citizen science. There's great stuff that goes on with that. Computer cycles, some people think of citizen science, sort of study at home as being citizen science. Indeed, it does fall under, but it's not using the wetware, the processing power of the human. It's just using the leftover computer cycles. So we, in particular, focus on this new version of citizen science, which is the data analysis portion of it. And so we provide the online volunteers with interfaces to different sets of data and a particular task for them to do. That then the science teams who initiated this, that project then take that database away and do further processing and publication of work on. So one interesting thing we found along the way is that after a study of motivations for why people participated in Galaxy Zoo, we actually thought, well, maybe it's because galaxies are pretty and they wanted to, okay. So it turned out that they actually, by 40%, wanted to contribute to meaningful research. This was a huge surprise to us. And it is what actually inspired us to continue on with different projects. And so we came up with Galaxy Zoo 2. And along the way, we decided that since one of the interesting things that happened was, by chance, when the original interface was developed, we put a link to the Sloan Digital Sky Survey tools. There's a page that aggregated information about each object in the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. That link was for free. It was put up on the interface, and so if a user wanted to, they could just click that link and get any information they wanted to about that particular galaxy. Now, this is not the kind of information that a general user might know how to interpret. But what we found is they did amazing things with just this piece of data. And they did it by posting to forums, which we put up because in the first 2 weeks of collection of people classifying the galaxies, we found that there were so many emails coming into us, we were unable to handle the load, so we put up a forum in self-defense and said, go talk amongst yourselves, please. Okay, so they did that, and they found interesting things. So Hanny is a Dutch school teacher. And she found this object, and I'll do a blow-up of it in a second. She got served up this galaxy there in the middle and was supposed to decide whether it was spiral or elliptical, but she saw actually some weird, in the Sloan image, bluish blob. And she posted on the forum, what is this? All right, and so eventually, this is data from a telescope in La Palma, a 4.5-meter telescope. Eventually, she got the attention of the astronomy community, and all the astronomers went, what is that? And eventually, they all ended up, including Hanny, proposing for Hubble Space Telescope time, receiving it, and finding that Hanny's voorwerp, as it's now known, voorwerp is Dutch for object, is in fact a distant light echo of a quasar that has turned off. And if you want to ask me what that is later, you can, but I won't go through the explanation about that. But it is an object that we knew should have existed, but we never saw before. We never saw any evidence for this before. All right, and so that's the explanation of what it is. Hanny did it again, And it's just, Hanny was there in the beginning, and so she got maybe the low-hanging fruit, I don't know, but she also found something that was a very small, tiny green galaxy then, and she posted on the forum under the heading, "Give Peas a Chance," because it looks like a tiny little green pea. So various other members of the, forum started finding their own green peas, okay? And, okay, the astronomers were off doing something else. We were not reading the forum. We were not paying attention to them. So what did they do? They went off and found the information for themselves. So they went and they taught themselves how to do structured query language searches of the Sloan database. They went and they taught themselves how to do literature reviews. And they went and they found, and pretty soon, if you actually read the forum, eventually you find them talking about, well, the peak in the O3 lines is blah, 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 blah. And these are people that have no astronomy education whatsoever. We know they are secretaries, we know they're magistrates, we know the backgrounds of some of these people. Okay, all right, so it ended up leading to several publications once the at one point they did say, hey, we need attention here. We think we've discovered something, help. So they put a graduate student from Yale University on this, and it's ended up in several publications. And it is an ongoing discussion in the academic community as to exactly what these objects are. Okay, so that leads me to the sort of three classifications of objects. We have our known knowns. That's represented by the primary task, okay? Are galaxies elliptical or spiral? Then we have the known unknowns, all right? So these are like Hanny's Vorwerp, things that we know should be out there, but we don't know where they are. And then we have things like the green peas, the serendipity, things that are unknown unknowns, okay? And I took the Donald Rumsfeld picture out of this. But anyways, so what is this all doing? So one of the things that we realized is that that old-fashioned linear forum tool does not work. Okay, the astronomers weren't paying any attention to what was going on. We still haven't read everything in the forum. Maybe there's stuff lurking in there. We don't know. And then clearly, when we have graduated to over 600,000 people, there's no way that we could have 600,000 people meaningfully discuss things that they're finding there. And then the other thing is that there was no, when we built the forum, there's no real link between the main task and the social media tools, any discussion tools that could be used. And so there was no easy transfer between that primary task and the forum, and so we lost people on both sides. And so we set about to developing tools to make the most use out of the user's desire to conduct meaningful research and accelerate knowledge discovery. And I think I have 2, 3, okay, so I'll just speed through this. But the idea comes from something that Alyssa Goodman has talked about from Harvard in her campaign to do something similar for professional astronomers in what she calls seamless astronomy. And that is, if you have this researcher sitting here in the middle, and there's just this plethora of data and literature and tools to get into the data and the literature, and we don't know anymore what's the best thing to use. Okay, so we've got the citizen science in the same boat. So we figure the best way, instead of trying to overcomplicate things, is start simple. Okay, we've got the data, we've got archives, we've got the zoo primary task. Now what we need to do is develop tools that allow the citizen science to visualize, to search, to analyze, and communicate. And then, of course, all of that sits between this sort of literature piece that we've been talking about up to now. And so to emulate the formal science education pipeline, where we have many different levels of engagement, all the way from kindergarten and first grade when you have to go, all the way back to when you have a career in science, we feel that there is the potential here to create an informal learning pipeline in which, with the Zooniverse tasks, you start. Many people, 600,000 people are doing the primary task, but eventually Hanny and her buddies are the ones that are actually really doing the meaningful research out of it. Of course, way back on the first level of engagement, they are contributing to meaningful research, but they themselves may not actually be engaged in the process of research. So the solutions were, and we're in the process of developing all these. Our talk tool is done and out there and showing amazing results. But the idea was to develop this object-oriented forum. And that basically means that everything is searchable, everything is hashtagable, everything can be, it is one big mush. And it's up to the infrastructure of that talk tool to be able to tease out what discussions are going on. And then the next step was building a citizen science journal, so something like an open access journal, but for that group of people on the Zooniverse, and then finally to develop these tools that allow the advanced users to go in and make their own discoveries. And so we launched the talk tool with the Planet Hunters project, and immediately gave them the option, after they did a classification, if they wanted to discuss the star that they had just classified. And that star would potentially have planets orbiting it. And as you'll notice that they're not scared by data. That was one of the things that we found out, that actually serving them up light curves didn't matter. They loved it. It was fine. And so this is a representation of the talk tool. It's basically like a social media board, and they can post the objects that they have found. They can talk about it. They can find that, and this is just one person's example who is not an astronomer, who has found many planet candidates around stars and has gone into mentoring other people on the talk tool. This is just the depth of work that he's gone into, and mentoring them on how to use Excel to do light curve folding and other things like this, and finding that he's a professional at it, because if you see this post here, this guy says he's a professional in terms of teaching Excel, and this whole thing is really slick. Okay, so we find that the people who are using Talk are doing a lot of peer mentoring, which is exactly what we wanted. They're making discoveries, and now we want a place for them to publish their discoveries, which is letters, which we've just launched in alpha, and we've just put together in my own group work that we were doing on something called Blazars, and our username is GopherZoo. And so we can publish something that an undergraduate did in our group. And then my last couple slides just say that we're in the process of developing these user-based research-enabling tools. And then this is my slide that says, yes, citizen science really is here to save the day for all of that data. What do we do when we have not only 40 terabytes of data in 10 years, which is what the Sloan had, but 40 terabytes of data coming per day off of the next telescope, the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope that's going to be going up in a couple of years. And so I just leave this for people to look at while I take questions.
I was interested in the measurable accuracy because, you know, that's the first thing that you think about is how do you control quality of observations. So how many observations do you kind of need in order to get a sense that you're getting fairly quality data out of this whole thing?
Yeah, and that will depend on the task. But for the galaxies, for example, 30 was the average that we needed to have 30 classifications. Obviously, there are going to be some cases in which you can remove the image from being served up when you get to 10, because 10 out of 10 people agree. All right. So, right, it becomes, I have a slide which shows, you know, the statistics of this and the probability distributions. And then at that point, the science team just takes those probability distributions. And if they want ultra clean data, then they make filters and cuts to keep the ultra clean data. If they have a use that it doesn't matter as much if the errors are larger, they can use less pure or clean data. But right, so we developed these consensus algorithms, and you can show what the probability distributions are. Yeah.
Hi, is this on? Everyone hear me? Okay. So I'm wondering what you could tell researchers in other fields outside of astronomy how to collect their data in such a way that it can be used for these types of citizen science projects. Obviously, you need data that is well organized and housed. You know, that Sloan Digital Sky Survey, without that data being so well kept and presented, it would be difficult to create such a nice infrastructure around it.
Right, and so at this point, we are typically working with groups that maybe don't have their data as well organized as the Sloan. But let me give you one example. So sort of two in the transcription arena. The first one is something called the Ancient Lives Project, which is taking ancient Egyptian papyrology, or papyri from the town of Oxyrhynchus. And they're 500,000 fragments stored in the library in Oxford. And it's taken 120 years since their discovery and carting back to Oxford to actually transcribe and publish what has been kept on those papyri over thousands of years. So that is something. I shouldn't really say this, but I've been there, and it is not well organized. So what we ended up doing is working with the curator of that collection to image the fragments. So a large number of the fragments had been imaged already in the 1980s, and we used those as well, but it turned out we ended up having to go back and re-image some of them. So depending upon how much funding we have for a project, we can take that step and help in that organization process so that the images are then produced in a way that we can actually serve up in our interfaces. So one of the next projects that we're going to do, which is similar, is working with natural history museums and taking a lot of their collections that have cards that have been pinned to the beetle. And the cards have a lot of metadata on them, of course. And if you want to be able to search all that metadata and make interesting conclusions about species, whatnot, you're going to need to image all of those cards. That is a very difficult task to do. So that's a situation where if somebody is interested, and as they are putting species in the deck, if they actually just took that extra time to digitize the card, or however they process the metadata now, but keeping track of that metadata would help enormously.
As you were talking about the numbers of people, I was curious about people's engagement with their creative contributions, or what some people might call intellectual property. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Sure. Generally, we have not had any complaints. Okay, so actually, I did have one more slide. Thank you. So here's the ethics involved. We make sure that any person who has contributed any click whatsoever is acknowledged in any paper that is written. Now, we can't print all of the authors, okay? But we can provide a link to a printout of all the authors, okay? The second thing is we have to make sure that anybody such as Hanny, who's been involved in the real efforts of decoding what's going on in a particular instance, they actually are contributors to the papers. They are authors on the author line of the paper. And so we feel and hope that through these mechanisms, we never end up in the situation where somebody says, hey, that was my idea, right? And that is, again, behind the whole idea of putting something like the talk tool out there, is to allow people to find each other and converse about collections and objects that they are thinking might be of interest.
I think we're actually technically out of time. And I don't want to cut off. This is a great conversation, and I know that there are probably some questions for some of the other speakers as well. So if you have questions, I invite you to come down and approach people with questions one-on-one. And thank you all very much for coming to the